Of Iran with our next guest, Congressman Matt Van Epps, who joins us via the Murphy Show hotline. He represents, of course, the 7th Congressional District, and it's always a pleasure to talk with Congressman Van Epps. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, I mean, it's always a pleasure. Obviously, a lot to catch up on. Not the least of which is the conflict in Iran. Look, I've been accused of being a little bit negative on this because I don't know that we can believe anything that the Iranians are saying to us. I understand that you can't necessarily go to a negotiating table with that attitude, which is probably why I will never be near a negotiation table. But, I mean, obviously your military experience dictates that I ask you the question, what do you think about this? What are your concerns?
Yeah.
And how are you hopeful that this turns out?
Absolutely. Well, I think to start, this is peace through strength. Being executed. I'm cautiously optimistic in this. I think there's a lot to figure out. The vice president said, hey, we've built the very base foundation of the house, but the whole house is still got to get built. And that 14-point MOU is just the framework, and it's going to take the next 60 days of negotiating in order to fully work through what we've seen. Now, the President Trump is the deal maker in chief, and I think he's ready if he doesn't see something that makes sense that's in the U.S. interest, that he'll go back to the military option. But I think we've effectively used the military option, over 20,000 strikes by the U.S. and Israel against and regional partners against Iran to decimate their military. And we're now at the negotiating table, and I think that's where we want to be. And I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there are a number of things I'm hoping to see in this deal. And the first is obviously no nuclear weapons. A nuclear Iran, the biggest exporter of terror the world has ever seen, is unacceptable. And I think we're the negotiators, and we're on a pathway to ensure that the inspectors can get in the country, and that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon going forward. There's still a lot to be seen with that, but that's point number one.
Well, I was waiting to see if you get to point number two, but I'll question you on this. Well, let me ask you about I understand that we did everything in good fashion in terms of what we were able to do with bombing the NATO. What we couldn't do is open back the strait. And I mean, is it fair for me to look at this from outside, Congressman, and say that we couldn't get that back open, and had we that ability, maybe we would have a better negotiating front? Is there any fear on your part that we could not manage to do that in a modern war effort that includes drones and mines and these types of things?
I think on that point, I'm confident in the U.S. Navy and their ability. We saw both from what they were able. It wasn't. The president came out and talked about some of the oil that's moved. He made some public comments about that through the blockade, but the U.S. Navy does a really great job with that. My hope is that we have built into this agreement that they don't have the ability or the desire to close the strait. And there's a lot that has to get worked out to do that, but I'm confident in our military and the ability that we have. But let me kind of continue some other thoughts.
Yeah, please do,
Matt. I think as we think about the deal, we need enforceable conditions. I think you've talked some about that this week, where for me, I think maybe some of the cautious optimism is that we need enforceable conditions and robust inspections for this, and so we need to allow those IAEA inspectors in. And it's one thing to build it into the agreement; it's another thing for it actually to happen. And so it's got to be enforceable, it's got to be robust, and there's got to be permanent restrictions. Restrictions on nuclear weapons, on their nuclear weapon development, and that's got to be durable and shouldn't expire after a predetermined period. And as I mentioned before, this deal should have no pathway to a nuclear weapon. It is just if this regime had a nuclear weapon, their ability to influence the Strait of Hormuz and then regionally is a whole different level. And so that it's got to be built in that way. And it's why I'm cautiously optimistic. But this is the biggest exporter of terror the world has ever known. This is a regime that has killed Americans, to include when I and many of your listeners were serving in Iraq, and that's unacceptable. And I think this is the first president that has gotten to this point where we've been able to use military options to drive negotiations here, and still a lot of work to do, though. How
does this agreement, if we understand the basic framework of the agreement, this is my last question on this. I want to ask you about data centers. And by the way, before I get into that question, I would note that Jay Harper's in the newsroom monitoring the weather, and there's apparently a radar-indicated tornado warning in Franklin County. We're watching that. That's Franklin County, not Franklin, Tennessee. Those are different places. So Franklin County, and we're going to monitor that, and we're going to update you on that in just a couple of minutes. But we're talking right now with Congressman Matt Van Epps of the 7th Congressional District, discussing Iran, amongst other things. But how do you feel? I look at this agreement, and I look at some of the agreement that was made in the Obama administration, and sadly, a lot of those agreed to terms were violated by the Iranians, and they received some of the benefit. Is it a matter of just monitoring? Is it a matter of making sure that we keep our thumb on the pulse of what's going on and how they are abiding by the rules of the negotiated points, as to ensure that they're not just, basically lying to us again?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so this administration is not flying plane loads of cash into Tehran like Obama and Biden did. And that's really important. It wasn't enforceable. They didn't have any mechanisms. They used the money to fund terrorism.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I saw coming out today that I think is really smart, and I hope moves forward, is that the assets that will be unfrozen will be used to buy American farm products, soy, wheat, corn. I really like that mechanism in this deal. I think that's really smart of the president to do that. We have very low amounts of exports that go into Iran. I think under tens of millions of dollars, maybe a year, pretty low. And being able to see the strategic opportunity to unlock a foreign market, and ensuring, I think it has to go to the Iranian people, not to the regime, not to be used as a negotiating leverage for the Iranians, but unlocking American farmers' ability to get into that market is I hope that moves forward. I hope that we're able to figure out how to make that enforceable and lasting, because that's really smart and is something totally different than we saw under Obama and Biden. And I think you're right. I think some of this is built into the framework of the deal, and we still have the military option available, the economic option. Our blockade was squeezing them at $500 million a day, and that forced them to the negotiating table. And so we still have that economic ability. We still have the ability to freeze their assets, to be able to use military options if needed. And so I think the weight of that, in addition to working with our regional partners and ensuring that they want regional stability. And so I think all of that together puts us in a good position to have outcomes here that we want to see.
Our guest is Congressman Matt Van Epps of the 7th Congressional District. I want to shift gears to a conversation that we've been talking quite a bit about in Middle Tennessee, and I imagine it's been on your radar screen as well, and that is this idea of data centers, right? So data centers have been around for a minute, but they're growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we have these hyperscale centers that are being built and or proposed in many portions of the country. And there's a lot of concern in Middle Tennessee about where these things are going. There was one that got a lot of attention that was proposed to go next to the zoo. We don't know exactly where that one is right now, but there's a balancing act, right? Obviously we all use computers. We all have a smartphone, or at least most of us, a laptop, and all of that has to do with data centers. But at the same time, folks it feels like a little bit of a NIMBY situation. Like, everybody knows that we need someplace to take our garbage, but nobody wants that near them. Right? Yeah. What is the role what is your role? What's the role of the government in terms of monitoring and potentially even regulating data centers and placement?
Well, I think when it comes to building infrastructure just broadly, we always need to balance the needs of the most immediate communities with the needs of continuing whatever that progress is. And we need to innovate. And I think that's really important here, is the innovation component. It's also true with AI and data centers. we're in a global competition with China on every single front. They have more robots in China than the rest of the world combined. They're building coal plants faster than the rest of the world combined, and they're using that technology to fund their AI data centers. And AI, it goes to our compute, our ability to train AI models, and we have to win against China here so that we set the global standard and we are in front of them and in front of any nefarious actor. That being said, I think it's really important that we consult with communities about data centers and where they go. And it should be we should think of this, I think, in terms of not regulating and not regulations and having government bureaucrats involved in the process, but more from an innovation standpoint. Let's continue to unleash America's innovation mindset and the ability to produce great products faster and cheaper, and work with communities for these data centers to go where it makes sense.
Congressman Matt Van Epps joining us for a few more moments, just discussing obviously foreign policy and now policy regarding data centers across the state of Tennessee. Have you gotten considerable constituent pushback on data centers? I'm just curious. I'm kind of taking a poll because it feels to me like there's been a lot of conversation lately about it.
Yeah, we have heard, and I think with the data center proposed by the National Zoo, it just is caused some attention on the matter. I think here regionally and with my constituents, and so it is top of mind for a lot of folks. Serving on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee has provided a lot of insight about AI and quantum and the need for us to continue to innovate in those spaces so that we can lead. Now, I think there are, we're thinking about data centers. I think there are a couple of misnomers potentially circulating out there about modern data centers. And most modern data centers now recycle or reuse the water they have. So it's not a drain on water resources. The president actually has led on with a bunch of the main companies, Google's, the Metas, on the Paycheck Protection Plan to ensure that ratepayers aren't shouldering the burden and that these companies figure out the power sources and requirements that are needed, and we don't shift that burden. And so we need to keep doing that to ensure that ratepayers are protected, to ensure that we're able to compete and beat China in this and put data centers in the right locations. There's also some pretty interesting science talking about innovation on geothermal cooling systems. This is a friend, a colleague of mine in the House, Pat Harrigan out of North Carolina, had to build a lead on this on geothermal, and it allows both the heating and cooling of water, subterranean, and there's some really good technology now, and it's things like that can help propel us to use water efficiently and to cool these locations and not be a drain on other water resources or other power resources.
Matt, always a pleasure to catch up with you. We look forward to the time, and we look forward to the next visit already. Thank you for representing the 7th Congressional District in Washington, D.C., and come see us the next time you're in town.
Thanks, Matt. Will do. Appreciate all you do, and honored to serve. Thank you, sir.
All right, take care. There's Matt Van Epps, Congressman from the 7th Congressional District.